I'm not the smartest. There's nothing ultra special about me other than if I see something that needs fixing, I just try to fix it. And when you're solving for a need for others and you work hard at it, then you'll succeed. If you start a business or if you're, doing work to just, solve for your own needs, like even if you take a job because you just want to make money, it's not going to be a successful job for you because there's no purpose tied to the work other than a paycheck. And really, like in work, the paycheck is bonus. The purpose is the thing that keeps you going and the thing that makes any business successful.
Welcome to the Regenerative Real Estate Podcast, a show about human environments and how they can be used as a force for good. Conversations that educate and inspire people looking for a different way to do real estate. I'm Neil Collins, and on this episode, I'm joined by Emily Niehaus, a purpose-driven change agent that has a resume that includes nonprofit leader, entrepreneur, and even mayor. I get pitched a lot of great ideas on a regular basis, and I've come to learn that ideas, well, they're cheap. I don't mean to say that diminutively or that there's little merit to a good idea, but let's be honest. The hard part is to move an idea into action. Some people get stuck in ideation mode, and they never make it out of this phase. Others, like myself, we're great at coming up with ideas, and we can get the initial momentum going, but we really need what Gino Wickman calls an implementer to fully mature the systems and processes. And then there seems to be this rare type of person that possesses the combination of skills of both the visionary and the implementer. This is the category I would put our guest Emily Niehaus. She is such a dynamic human being that is able to see problems and relentlessly overcome obstacles to provide solutions. I'm sure if she was in Silicon Valley, she would be labeled as a serial entrepreneur. But in the mountain town of Moab, Utah, Emily has gone by many different names such as community land trust leader, mayor, and more recently, social enterprise founder. I originally came across Emily's work several years ago when I learned about the groundbreaking organization she founded called Community Rebuilds. This is a community land trust like no other that seems to have embraced permaculture design and creates naturally built, permanently affordable homes for local residents. After 8 years at the helm of this organization, she saw the need for deeper change at the policy level. So she gave up running the nonprofit and ran for the mayor of the town and won. The story doesn't end there, however. Emily is now 3 years into creating the Heron School, a school focused on twice gifted students that have things like autism, dyslexia, anxiety, or ADHD. Moreover, what's interesting from a real estate perspective is that Emily saw the opportunity to purchase an inn in Moab that she was able to convert into a profit-for-purpose hospitality business that supports the operations of the school. It was incredible to talk with Emily. She is so sincere and grounded, and she exemplifies the term change agent. So if you find this episode interesting or inspiring, I hope that you will share it with someone who you think would benefit from listening. We also love ratings and reviews. Now, without further ado, let's jump into the episode with Emily Niehaus. Emily, this is, you don't know this, but I've kind of followed your name a little bit for the last couple of years and have always kind of circled back to this, like, man, I need to reach out to Emily. There's got to be an interesting story behind her work. And I think whenever you became mayor, I'm like, well, she's probably really busy being a mayor. So let me just pick this up in a couple of years. And so here we are.
Here we are. The thing about living in a place like Moab is you can be whatever you want to be. So you can start an affordable housing development company building straw bale homes with low income families through a student education program. You can be the mayor. You can start a high school for gifted and complicated kids. You can do whatever you want. When you're in a small community, it's like there's like this beautiful tension of resource. You become your own resource.
I get that. I'm in a small town of 1,100 on an island in the Pacific Northwest. And so
Where are you?
I'm on Whidbey Island.
Oh, okay. I think I knew that. My in-laws live on Anacortes.
Oh, nice. Okay. I wanted just to ground this and just say what my interest is the story. Like I have developed this working theory over the past 4 years of doing this, that the most interesting things that I come across is people that are integrating their life experiences and like really understanding like, okay, what's going on? Where am I at? What has helped get me to this vantage point? And then let me do something about it. A lot of people, I realize they don't do anything about it. And the people that do end up coming onto this show. And I just like, I'm fascinated with our relationship to place. And so, yeah, I mean, we can take this any direction. I'm sure you're used to getting interviewed. I'm sure there's a lot of like the same old questions.
Well, I will likely talk a lot about what the term regenerative means to me in all of the things that I've done in my life, leading me up to this podcast with you. And it's interesting because when I think of like when I was introduced to the concept of regenerative, it was, do you know a guy named Joel Glansberg?
I do, yeah, with Regenerative.
Yeah. So he was the one that was like, you don't want to be sustainable. You want to be regenerative. And I'm like, ugh, all right, new buzzword. What does that mean? And then I was like, you're right. I drank the Kool-Aid. I want to be regenerative. I don't want to just be sustainable in the things that I do. And what it did for me was opened up my kind of systems thinking framework of how I craft things to understand that there's no waste in a system.
What do you think that was, Emily, about the way maybe Joel framed it to go from sustainable to regenerative? Like what was so captivating for you to shift frameworks?
What he said about the difference between sustainability and regenerative, and I've actually given talks about it, is that in the Venn diagram, sustainability means people, environment, and money all coming together. In the center of that Venn diagram is like the sweet spot. Regenerative systems is like you take that Venn diagram and you turn it on its side and you see how when those things come together, how you can have really cool development.
And where do you take that? I mean, how did that shift your work for you?
Well, it helped me frame negative situations into positive situations. It helped me understand that there is no true waste in a system. Like the way that I applied it is like with community rebuilds, it was like I wanted to build affordable housing. I wanted to do it in a very pro-environmental way. I'm a feminist. So what does that look like? And so the people part, the environmental part, and then the money part being the affordable housing, like they all came together in the program, but the program was only able to sustain itself if we continued to do better, build with better building materials, go deeper into what our student education program looked like, what the students were exposed to, if they got college credit. And then, the homeowners, what was their experience in building their own home? How did we quantify their participation? What did that look like for the grant money? Yeah. And just always pushing ourselves to deepen the elements that created it, that would have been a sustainable building program. Because that's really, I think, how you move from just being sustainable, where you're doing the same thing, to regenerative, where you're you're continuing to grow within your system and within your organization or within your school. So like now it's like, the thing that people I think love and hate about working with me is that I am always pushing iteration, reiteration. And so it's, the breakfast menu is changing at the Sunflower Hill Inn next door. That is the funding mechanism for the school, for Heron School, that our teachers are deepening and working with our policy manual to ensure that we are growing alongside our students as an organization. Yeah. It's complicated. It's making things more complicated, but it's growing. And growth is beautiful and painful and can take a lot of work. In permaculture, there's this concept of the least amount of change for the greatest good. And sometimes I wonder, if I'm overcomplicating things until I look back at the progress and I realize, oh my gosh, we've done so much just by adding a policy or shifting what we're building with. Change is complicated and transitions always stink. Like nobody does well with transitions because, change is hard. But then once you get to the other side, you look back and you think, that was incredible. What a good choice we made. Or that was the worst decision we've ever made. We're never going to do that again. And then we learned something. And learning is just as important, especially if you want to have a healthy system.
The thing that really comes up for me is realizing that the project isn't, especially if it's grounded within real estate as an industry. We oftentimes look at this plot of land and say, what can we do here? What's the zoning? What's our resources? Let's create something out of that. And I think it puts a lid on the creative thinking and the process that goes into it, rather than saying, the project is the community. Now, what needs to get created on this site as that's going to be in service towards that?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I was doing affordable housing development for, 10, 12 years with community rebuilds. And as the doer, I was looking at policy that shaped what we built and how we built. And I got to that climax in my professional life where I thought, there's got to be an easier way to inform the system. And the position for mayor became available because the current mayor wasn't running again. And it was a buzz like, who's going to run? And I realized that whoever was going to be running for that position of mayor was going to have a microphone and get to say all kinds of things and get published in the paper. And I was always fighting to get out of the lifestyle, the B section of the paper, and, get some front page press for community rebuilds. I was always put in the B section. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to run for mayor, use the microphone to talk about building policy that I'd like to see implemented in my community, zoning policy that I'd like to see implemented in my community that would not only benefit my organization, but benefit, all of the people that are really working hard on this issue of affordable housing. So I used that microphone and then I won. And so I was literally at the table and in the room talking about housing policy from the policymaker perspective. And just when you think that's like, you've made it, now things are going to change, you realize that there's this thing called political will that is essentially like the ability to do stuff based on the people that elected you. You are beholden to the voters. And when they get angry about something, you got to listen. And especially since it takes usually a governing body like a council or a commission to pass that policy. And while I was serving as mayor, there was this nasty D word that everyone kept using and freaking out about. Do you know what word I'm talking
I
about?
don't.
The bad word that starts with a D?
Depression?
No, worse than depression
Oh, gosh.
to some people. Real estate relative.
I don't know.
Density.
Density. Ah, okay.
So I found that when talking about density and policies around density, that it was like this horrible 4-letter word, that it was just a bad word. People didn't want to talk about density. It was a scary topic, especially, we see the American dream shifting in our country and with the next generation of people building and buying homes. And they are using this word density. They want to have different development patterns. And people who bought 20 years ago, 20 plus years ago, people that were raised to, you know, achieve this American dream, then they opposed this idea of higher density. And I was lucky to be part of that conversation, but it was a hard one to have in this community. Do you find that the topic of density is difficult where you live on Whidbey Island?
That's a great question. There is a progressive beat on how we plan and design for our cities and our towns. That the agenda is very much walkable, bikeable, create more density, and it's got this feeling of yes, like I know that we need to move in that direction, but it's also a very two-dimensional view of like, okay, this is just the policy instrument that we're going to use, and it doesn't create necessarily a whole community. And so I sit in this really interesting space of trying to reconcile that of if we're just going to come in as an urban planner and impose this is what the right way to do it is without necessarily taking into consideration what the community actually wants there and how it's going to work, then it sets us up for the same conversation, which is, especially in the development arena, you're either going to get on board with these changes or you're going to sue us. There's not a lot of middle ground there. And what I'm really interested in is how do we take the more sustainable design patterns and land use patterns that it does include density, but create a different process that's going to harmonize those different actors on either side so that it doesn't just end up in a political stalemate with one side saying that we've got a bunch of NIMBYs and the other side saying that you're destroying the community.
Yeah. So you made me think of a couple of things. The first thing I want to say is that the reason we're in this mess is because we look at shelter as an asset as opposed to a basic need, right? And then another thing that's got us in this mess is this land ownership, the complication around land ownership, where the people that own the land tend to make the rules. And so it complicates things for, a lot of people that don't own land or don't own the home that they're living in. So I just kind of wanted to put those two things out there because then those are a lot of the people those are the users. That's the user group that we're trying to engage. And, it's important that, everybody in the community is brought together to talk about development patterns. And yet, like, the voices we hear that are most loud are the landowners. So there's a lot of work in community organizing where it's truly bringing everybody in the community together to have these conversations. And yeah, when you bring everybody together, I mean, I disagree with my best friends. Heaven forbid I have to talk to every single person in my community and come up with some kind of agreement and consensus around policy, land use policy, development patterns, that sort of thing. But that's the work that we do. And I have found that the best way to bring people together, for better or worse, is this idea of a common enemy, which can sound really negative, right? Like, because it's already you're like, oh, common enemy, like who's the villain of the story? But then when we start thinking about like, who is the villain of the story when we're talking about flooding? The villain of the story is climate change. And so that can be a good villain to use to galvanize buy-in. And so, for example, if you're looking at a development and the city engineer is like, all right, you have to have X amount of water detention. And the developer's like, no, I need to put 4 units on that. And then people are like, oh, well, we want open space policy and oh, we want a playground, recreation. And there's all of these like differing interests. And the developer's like, look, I just have to maximize the amount of land I have because I've got to make sure that the dollars work for this project and that it pencils out. Well, all of a sudden, if everybody's like, well, here's this villain of the story is, flooding. And the worst thing that can happen to a development is that it's ruined because of a flood, right? That it's damaged because of a flood. So maybe there are ways that you can, like through permaculture design principles, where several things there's several overlapping interests that use one space. So you could have flood mitigation, a playground, a community garden, overflow parking, all in the same area. And if the developer has to have some amount of setback or open space, then all of those different uses can be piled on top of each other. And then you have consensus and then everybody wins. And the villain doesn't have to be the city that passed the policy of detention basins or flood mitigation, or the people that want the open space, or the moms or dads that want the playgrounds, or the elders that want the pickleball court. It's like, what can we put in the different spaces? And then ultimately, affordable housing is an emerging need in the real estate. And everybody's trying to crack the nut. Like, how do we build affordable housing? And it's so complicated. With community rebuilds, we've built over 70 homes now as a nonprofit, and everything from a 2-bedroom, 1-bath to a 3-story twin on the top of Mount Crested Butte. Homes on reservation, on Hopi Reservation, homes in Colorado and in Utah, and in as rural of a community as Bluff, Utah. And all of those different homes, through a student education program. So not just building homes, but building builders. And so making it really complicated building affordable housing. And yet, look at the outcome. It's not just more affordable housing, but it's feeding back into a system that needs to build more affordable housing by building more builders and putting on the shelf a different housing typology, straw bale construction, earthen floors and earthen plasters, like crazy stuff that you can't find at Home Depot. But if you build it enough times, then it becomes a viable building product for others. And building affordable housing is so difficult. You have to find tricks to save money. And when I got into community rebuilds, developing community rebuilds as an organization, I asked the question, what is the cheapest house? What home costs the least amount of money? And this natural building joker friend of mine was like, straw bale home, because it's, straw bales, which is an agricultural byproduct, and it's dirt. So it's dirt cheap. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this natural building thing because it also aligns well with my environmentalism and how can we get a bunch of women on the job site too. And the idea was born.
Well, let me try to make sense out of this, because I think it's good going back. And I want to put context, because I think I saw on your CV that you have a degree out of Clemson. Is that right?
Yes. Go Tigers, Clemson University. Yes.
Where did you grow up, Emily? What are you a native of Moab?
No, I grew up in Ohio. I was the youngest of 6 kids, so I didn't get a lot of attention growing up. And I had to fight for dinner. No, it wasn't that bad, but I grew up in Ohio, and by the time I turned 18, I was like, I'm out of here. I went to summer camp each summer, It was like a camp down the road and around the corner in the woods. And I loved it. I loved it so much that I thought, I want to live in nature when I grow up. I loved it. I loved camp so much. And so, as a senior in high school, I was looking at different colleges. And then there was this like unicorn college called Prescott College that I heard about. And my guidance counselor was like, you should check it out. You can get a degree in backpacking. I was like, I am sold. I am going to Arizona and I am going to do this. Actually, my senior year, when everybody else was on winter break having fun, I got an Amtrak ticket and I took the train out west for the first time to see what this Arizona thing everybody was talking about, what Arizona was. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is an incredible country. This is not forest. This is different. And so I came out and I attended Prescott College and quickly realized that getting a degree in backpacking was not what I wanted to do. I actually really enjoyed school and learning and classroom study. So I pivoted and I transferred to Clemson. And then I stayed in Clemson for my graduate degree in sociology. And why Clemson? So in 1996, I graduated from high school. And so it was like right when the World Wide Web was coming out. So there I was in Prescott College, unhappy. And I went on the internet and I searched like school colleges to go to that have recreation, but also sociology. And Clemson was like number one back then in the late 90s. So I transferred.
What took you from Clemson to Moab? Do you think Moab is your place? Like, is this your forever community?
Totally. Moab is my forever place. I was at Clemson and I was graduating and friends were telling me that there was this park, Bryce Canyon in Utah, that was hiring a park ranger. And I didn't know what I wanted to do as my next step. I was pretty sure I was headed to Seattle to get either an environmental law degree or an environmental sociology PhD. And then I heard about this job at Bryce Canyon. So I thought, oh, I'll take a year off and I'll do that. So I worked as an interpretive ranger at Bryce Canyon and I fell in love with Utah. And I didn't want to go back to school because there was so much to do. There was so much play to do in Utah. And I got stuck. And then this guy, Chad Niehaus, said, marry me and move to Moab. And I said, okay. So I did that. And I, in saying yes to the marriage, I didn't realize I was also saying yes to Moab. Like at that moment, I was like agreeing to marry Moab till death do us part. So I'm here. And yeah, running for mayor and being the mayor and then having a child that has some pretty specific education needs. He's on the spectrum and he has ADHD and he's gifted. He's amazing. I had to figure out what I was going to do in terms of school for him and school for kids like him. And so while I was the mayor, I was learning a lot about my son and his needs. And there was this moment where I was like, oh no, I think I'm going to have to move from Moab because Moab doesn't have what I need. And then I thought, oh, it doesn't have what I need. So I need to bring it here to Moab. And then I launched Heron School.
And this is the progression that I really want to connect. You're moving to Moab. You're essentially marrying place, and a partner comes with that. What was the initial seed, that germ of, I want to be in service towards creating attainable housing for the community members here? Was that's what I want to build off of? Like how do you go from like, you don't know this place, you're playing in Bryce Canyon and you're starting to, it sounds like, just immerse yourself in the needs of the community.
Yeah. So here's what happens. It's like, I don't know if it's magic or predetermination or what, but I feel like if you say yes to the things that are presented to you if you're living in a yes zone of life, everything unfolds exactly how it's supposed to be. And, do we have control over our destiny? I don't know. I won't get into that. But I will say, I landed in Moab with a master's degree in applied sociology, had no idea what I wanted to do, but knew what I didn't want to do. I didn't want to work for the Park Service. I loved my time at Bryce Canyon, but I knew that working for the Park Service was not for me. I knew I loved theater, and so I joined community theater. I knew I needed to make some money, and so the only job for a sociologist was working for the Department of Child and Family Services as a caseworker, which I guess I didn't know enough about to take that job. And I realized that caseworkers have the hardest job in the world because you're, essentially helping families succeed. Sometimes where parents are unable to say no to drugs, bad drugs, or violence toward their children. I mean, sad situations. So I was a caseworker and I saw a lot of dark, sad things in my community of Moab. And that was really my introduction to the community. But there was this one thing that the judges would all say to these families that were trying to keep their kids in their custody, these families that were working really hard for being sober, working really hard for maintaining jobs. They were court ordered also to have stable housing. And so as a caseworker, I'm helping families stabilize their lives, right? Stay sober, have jobs, have housing. And I'm looking at the housing stock in Moab and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is tough. This is a tough place to find a place to live. There's no affordable housing other than like single wide trailers. And there wasn't a lot of, economic mobility options for families. And so I was like, I am a horrible case manager. I am not good at this child and family services job because I cry every day. But I think I can nail this housing thing. I think I can do housing. And so I left the Department of Child and Family Services set to build affordable housing instead.
I will say, though, I've spent a lot of time in the affordable housing arena. The conversation is around the number of units, the AMI, the conversation is not around permaculture, straw bale, bio-based building materials. And certainly, I think the time frame that you're talking about, 2010, I would imagine not very many people had even heard of a community land trust. Like,
yeah.
Decommodifying real estate, what?
Yep.
And that's where I certainly am still referencing whenever I'm talking about affordable housing, I'll reference community rebuilds as, hey, here's an organization. I don't know much about them, but what I do know is really intriguing. And you should just at least go look at their website. And let's touch on that because I do like it. It seems like on the CV, you've kind of got this setup from community rebuilds to mayor. And that was an interesting bridge. And it also looks like from Sunflower Hill to Heron School, there's another setup there of like those seem linked. And I really want to get into that too, because it captures my interest in the same way that community rebuilds does. Yeah. Let's kind of put a bow on the community rebuild side from like just how at that time frame, how do you even create a community land trust or an organization that's going to do something that is even wildly different from your contemporaries that are doing affordable housing in different places?
I was not smart enough to say no. I did not know enough to know how hard it was going to be to build affordable housing. So I just jumped into it. I think that ignorance really is the most important part of innovation, because otherwise, if somebody said, hey, let's start an organization like Community Rebuilds, I'd be like, no way. Too much work. It's never going to work. There's no way. So there's ignorance and then there's a little bit of luck. So remember I said I was doing that community theater stuff. Well, it was an actor on stage with me that was the natural builder that I was like, so I'm trying to build this affordable housing. How do I do it? Oh, and then there was one other part. So I knew I wanted to build affordable housing, but I didn't know anything. I didn't know what a loan was. I didn't know what amortization meant. I didn't know anything about business. I didn't know what being in the red or in the black meant. I had never looked at a profit and loss statement or a balance sheet. So I didn't know anything. And I knew I needed to know something. And so there was this new credit union opening up and they were hiring. And I was like, I don't know anything, but I'll be a loan officer. They were like, oh no. But they said yes. And they trained me for 2 months. And then I was a loan officer for a credit union for 2 years because I wanted to learn lending. And so I was doing car loans and home loans and signature loans. And I was, learning, they call it the willingness and ability to repay a loan. And so it was like a debt to income ratio and a credit history and verifying income, all these even as it's coming out of my mouth, it sounds so boring, but it was like the stuff I needed to learn and the stuff you can't really go to college. I don't know if there's a class. There probably is by now, but there wasn't, back then. So I did that for 2 years to learn mortgage lending. And while I was doing that job, a gentleman came in and he was living in a single wide trailer that he owned on a piece of property that he owned. And he said that he had just had a heart attack and he had a lot of medical bills he wanted to pay. And could he borrow against his property to pay the bills, pay the hospital, and then pay his loan off? And I thought, sure, you got your house paid for? Yeah, that's a great asset. But it turns out that a single wide trailer is not an asset. It's a liability. Anything built prior to 1976, that's the HUD stamp of approval of a single wide trailer. Any trailers built pre 1976 were not a loanable product. And so, my eyes got big and I thought, oh my gosh, like looking around my town, there's hundreds and hundreds of single wide trailers that people own that are in need of desperate repair or replacement. And there's an affordable housing need. And what are we going to do? And so Community Rebuilds actually started as a, trailer replacement program to help families. It was like asset building, trailer replacement with the intention of also, growing as an organization to then build, new homes, not just trailer replacement, but new affordable homes all over the community. And eventually to potentially replace a trailer park with sustainable homes for the people that live in the trailer park. So just when you think like, okay, now she's got it. She knows mortgage lending. She sees the need in the community. Like, let's go, Community Rebuilds. Let's do this. I knew nothing about business. And so I was trying to get the nonprofit off the ground and failing because I didn't know anything. I didn't want to get my MBA because I didn't have the time or the money. There was no MBA program in Moab either. And so there was this woman, Ashley Kornblatt, who runs Western Spirit Cycling, that was hiring a bookkeeper. And I saw it in the paper. So I went, I applied and she was like, do you have any experience? And I said, no, but I will be with you. And I'm a really quick study. And I just need to learn about business. And so she said, well, all right, you be my bookkeeper. I'll teach you how I run this business. And she has her business degree from Tuck Business School. And so I joke and I say, well, my degree is, sort of one degree separation from Tuck Business School. And so I had this mortgage lending experience, business experience, and then I launched Community Rebuilds.
I want to take a quick opportunity before we continue this episode to talk about the work we are doing at Latitude Regenerative Real Estate. We see real estate as a catalyst for regeneration where we can change the way that we inhabit the planet. The hard part, though, is that real estate is complex and it requires specialized knowledge in areas around design and planning, capital and investment, and community engagement and construction. That's why at Latitude, our work goes to serve those that seek to create legacy projects that strengthen communities and develop ecological resilience. If you are needing help putting together a project like this and could use an experienced and dynamic development and sales team, we hope that you'll reach out to us at chooselatitude.com. Okay, let's get back into the episode. Because we touched on that how do you create policy, and we went into becoming mayor of the town, which is a great, build up. I even want to move past that because it seems like this new configuration at post 2021 in the current phase, and you've got a logo behind you that says Heron School, and I know you've got an inn right next to the school. Bring me into that conversation. Like how did this come out? You said This is
weird
because of your child and rather than leaving the community, but what's the path there?
All right, so this is just another part of like the weird story of that is my life. So I am mayor and my son is struggling at school, and I'm realizing that the middle school is not going to work for him. And I realized that I don't want to leave Moab. And so I've got to create a school opportunity. So I started shopping real estate, looking at different places to launch a micro school, which is what Heron School is. And I'm talking to realtors and I'm looking at different properties. And somebody was like, you should go look at the Sunflower Hill Inn. It's really beautiful. And I thought, well, I don't want to run a bed and breakfast. I just need a schoolhouse. So I said, might as well just go look at this property. So the property has 2 big buildings on it, separated by a swimming pool and a beautiful grassy lawn. And it's really well landscaped with lots of xeriscape, low water plants. And I tour the 2 buildings and they're so beautifully decorated. And the family that started and ran the inn for years did such an amazing job, the Stuckey family. And I'm thinking like, well, what's the zone? It's like an R3. It's a residential zone, but it's, a commercial, it's a grandfathered commercial use. And I'm just like thinking, oh, and it's expensive, like millions of dollars. But then I sat in between the 2 buildings. There's this gazebo area, this Ramada area between the 2 buildings. And I sat to just kind of think about things. And then I looked at one building and I thought, well, a bed and breakfast makes pretty good money. It's a revenue generator. And I looked over at the other building and I thought, that kind of looks like a schoolhouse. And then I called an investor and I said, would you consider being my investor if I run an inn and a school where it's like a profit for purpose model where the inn actually supports the basic infrastructure of the school, the utility payments and the lease payment. And so tuition is all that's needed to pay the staff for the school. I put the business idea together and it kind of worked on paper. And now we're going into year 3 and it works in the real world. It actually works. I had a weird idea and it works. And so we don't really have a multi-use zone in Moab, but I was able through a grandfathered zone and residential zone, you can have a school in a residential zone. That's an allowable use. I was able to create sort of like multiple use on one piece of property to be able to, fund a school. And the Sunflower Hill Inn is like the most beautiful, shiny object you could ever ask for in business and in life. And I've got such a great team running the inn. And what a great way to bring guest instructors, and other, people that want to participate in the school, because Moab is kind of a tricky place to find even to rent. It's expensive to rent.
And so tell me more about the school. Is it for people that are in the community already, or are you
Yeah.
attracting a wider demographic?
We do have families that are calling us interested in relocating to Moab for the school, but for now we're serving students 7th through 12th grade in the Moab area, students that are gifted or talented or neurodiverse, ADHD, autism, dyslexia. It's the people that we're serving, the students that we're serving live here in Moab. But my joke is that I started the school for the parents, not for the kids, because the parents are really who needed the safe, rigorous educational environment that is Heron School. The kids enjoying it is really bonus. Which is, it's kind of funny. But if we look at the public school system, we don't make decisions based on the needs of the kids. We make decisions based on how much money a school board has and like the pressures that come from parents anyway. So at least I'm, being honest about who I'm intending to, serve first, we'll say, and then serve students forever.
What's the vision there? Do you see this as just singular? The Heron School is a Moab-based campus, and that's it, or do you have grander visions of? No, let me scratch that adjective, because I think that it can be a grand plan to be a Moab school. But I'm curious around where you want to take that.
Well, you're probably like thinking to ask that question because, like, I don't tend to, based on like all the stuff I've gotten into in the past, it doesn't seem like I'm going to sit still. So here's what I think. When I was getting community rebuilds off the ground, people said, well, is it scalable? Is it replicable? Meaning, like, could you be building more than one home at a time? Could you be building more than one time in the same community? Could you scale your operation, within Moab or into other communities? Can you build the same? Can you replicate that home in other communities? And I was like, at the beginning, I was like, I'm exhausted. I don't know. Like, let me get through a few builds first. Well, now that we're, we just completed our second official year of school. I am like, well, is Heron School scalable? Is Heron School replicable? Scale is interesting because there's always going to be a finite population that we can serve here in Moab of students, because we know from the bell curve distribution of humanity that we are serving outliers. And so in a city of 5,000, in a county of 10,000, we're only going to have so many outliers that we would serve. Are there more students that could enroll? Yes. So we can definitely scale here in Moab and serve more students. And on this property too, we have room to grow. But I do think that as a micro school, we can be a really cool option for other rural communities to look at, solving the need for alternative education for kids, especially neurodiverse kids. So what that means for us, I don't know. Just last night, I was sitting on my front porch, drinking a glass of ice water, watching the sunset, actually asking myself, like, what am I doing? Which I ask a lot. I ask myself that a lot. Who am I serving? What am I doing? Is that all there is? I don't know. And I did realize that back in the beginning of this thought experiment of starting a school, I did have a dream of doing some kind of boarding school. So not just serving the students of Moab, but figuring out a way in which to serve neurodiverse students across the United States, across the world, because Moab is such a cool place to visit and learn. And so maybe it wouldn't be like boarding school, year round, but maybe I dig deeper in developing a summer camp, an overnight summer camp. And with all things, it's going to take me finding a unicorn that has experience running a summer camp that might want to relocate to Moab and launch that program as part of Heron School. And then maybe also we find a school that is a day school somewhere else that's serving the same population that we're serving here. And maybe they want to collaborate and have like their sophomores come and, learn in Moab, where we would be an extension program for another private school serving this population. Who knows? The idea jar is always full.
It's so fun though. What strikes me is like you tackled the nonprofit sector, you went into politics. There's now business. Like it's just this like big fluid pot of how do I address what's needed and be in service there.
Yes, actually, you nail it. You nail it. Like why I do what I do and why I'm successful at what I do. I'm not the smartest. I'm pretty crafty. I think that's being the youngest of 6 kids. So I've learned to be, scrappy and crafty. But I'm not like super smart. I'm not like there's nothing, ultra special about me other than if I see something that needs fixing, I just try to fix it. And when you're solving for a need for others and you work hard at it, then you'll succeed. If you start a business or if you're, doing work to just, solve for your own needs, like even if you take a job because you just want to make money, it's not going to be a successful job for you because there's no purpose tied to the work other than a paycheck. And really, like in work, the paycheck is bonus. The purpose is the thing that keeps you going and the thing that makes any business successful.
Love that. Emily, I'm gonna end with one last question because I'm looking at this like really beautiful logo that you have behind you of the Heron School. Where did the name come from?
So my son and I were floating down the river, the Colorado River, which is kind of our backyard here in Moab. And we were talking about this school. And I told him, I'll start this school that'll be inspired by you. It's not for you, necessarily just for you, but it's for all the kids like you. And it's inspired by you. And I want you to tell me what you would, if you could dream your biggest dream, what would that school look like? So we were, deep in a conversation, collaborating what the school was going to look like and, different programs and different classes. And then I said, well, what are we going to call it? And he was like, I don't know. What should we call it? And just at that moment, a great blue heron rose from the river and flew across the river in front of us. And if you've never seen a great blue heron fly in real life, I mean, they're so graceful. They're so beautiful. And we saw this, heron fly across the river. And I said, well, what about Heron School? And he said, cool. And that was that.
I love that story.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful logo too. And is with the Sunflower Hill Inn, is it open to the public? Like if people wanted to come by and check out the school or check out the inn, like is this a public thing or is it just for the school?
So the Sunflower Hill Inn, you can totally book a room at sunflowerhill.com. We love when people reserve a night stay at the Sunflower Hill. And I would love to extend to you, come to Moab and stay at the Sunflower and visit our school. The thing about touring a school is that, there's a lot of safety protocol that, you can't just take anybody on a tour. But the other thing is that we've created a learning environment that's very quiet and a great place for especially students with ADHD to study. So we don't really do tours of the school, but we love having visitors come stay at the Sunflower Hill Inn. And we love talking about the school, and you can see the school from the inn. And my favorite moment is when a guest is having breakfast and I go over to steal a cup of coffee. And I, start talking with guests, and I started explaining, who we're serving at the school. And then I thank them. I say, thanks for staying here at the Sunflower Hill Inn. We're a profit for purpose model, and your staying here actually supports the education of neurodiverse students here in Moab. And it's like, again, you're on vacation. Vacation is the purpose, but then all of a sudden you find that you've stumbled upon this like deeper purpose in the place that you've stayed. And it's really beautiful. It's a beautiful thing it's like, how can you deepen service to others? If you're running an inn, well, you can let them know that not only do you want to take care of them and make sure they have the most incredible experience here in Moab, but also that they're staying with you means they're contributing to the education of neurodiverse kids. I mean, cherry on top. Like, how do you get better than that?
I think that
really cool.
Really ties us back to how we opened this conversation of like, what is regenerative? And if you're to say, point to an example, I think this would certainly falls at the top of the list. So it is a pleasure to have you on the show, Emily. Really fascinating story. I've got goosebumps. I'm just thinking like, wow, what a journey. And you're not old and you've got a lot of life. It's like Emily continues to be somebody that I want to follow this journey to see where it goes. Because I'm sure there's going to be a book at some point in time around either an autobiography or a biography of how you've created change. So thank you for coming on.
Well, thank you for having me, and thanks for introducing all of us to this topic of regenerative real estate. It is such a cool lens to look at real estate through. So thank you for giving us that lens.
It is my pleasure. Okay, that is a wrap. Thank you for tuning in to the show today. If you got any value out of this conversation, be sure to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss future episodes. I can honestly say that these conversations have changed my life, my business, and how I steward my own home. If you want to learn more about our work at Latitude, where we partner with property owners, developers, and stewards to create thriving communities and resilient habitats, then you can find us online at chooselatitude.com. Also, if you have a project that you are needing help bringing to life or would like to align your investment portfolio with profitable investment opportunities that benefit communities and the environment, then you can reach out to me directly at neil@chooselatitude.com and we can start a conversation from there. Okay, that's it. Until next time, here's a friendly reminder that the water we drink falls from the heavens. The air we breathe comes from the beautiful symbiotic relationship we have with plants. The food that nourishes our bodies come from the ground we so cavalierly pave over, and that we all have a role to play to regenerate this planet.